All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. It appears more and more that we are venturing into a new era of COVID restrictions. President Biden stated his intentions to seek additional funding to develop a new COVID vaccine. Fauci was recently on CNN promoting masking up again, and more schools and venues are imposing COVID mandates. Also, there are signs the government is willing to use new tools and strategies to enforce harsher COVID lockdowns. We're going to be talking about this and more in episode 414 of the In the Tank podcast. Thank you. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. I'm getting ready. I'm working from remote home today because tomorrow's going to be a very busy day because tomorrow is benefit dinner day for us for the Heartland Institute here in Chicago with John Stossel. If you have not gotten your tickets yet, it's probably too late. We've already set the tables and the meals. It's actually not too late. If you go to heartland.org right now and you see the link to the benefit dinner, if you were to buy tickets today, you might still be able to make it, but it's going to be fantastic. And if you do miss it, we are going to be recording it, and we would expect to put John Stossel's fantastic keynote address up for everyone to watch on our YouTube channel later.
Yeah, or if you just show up, I'll sneak you in through the back door. So just be there and make sure to
that.
Also joining us, we have Chris Talgo, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I've actually got a question for you, Donnie, and you, Jim. Did you guys coordinate your cool-looking rose-colored Henleys? I mean, kind of feel left out of the cool club here.
Yeah, we did. It's kind of awkward because you're not on our mailing list. So yeah, you weren't included on that. If Andy were to show himself, you could see that he's wearing the same outfit. It's actually a uniform that we're starting here at the Heartland Institute.
Cool.
So before we get going,
I'll definitely not be wearing that uniform ever, but whatever.
He's too individualistic.
Yeah, of course.
Before we get going, I have to put out that message to audio-only listeners that are catching this show on probably a Friday or later that you can join us a day earlier if you tune in live on YouTube or Rumble or Facebook or Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, where we are streaming live every Thursday at noon Central Time. You can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. If you are a listener, though, leaving us a review on iTunes would be greatly appreciated. If you are a watcher, hitting that subscribe button, sharing this content, leaving a comment under the video, all of those things would be greatly appreciated. Helps break through those big tech algorithms, prevent content like this from being shown to more people. And also we have Super Chat. That's the other thing. Super Chat functionality enabled. So if you want to guarantee your comment or question is read and support the show that way, that's a great way to go about doing that. Jim already mentioned benefit dinner tomorrow. So Climate Change Roundtable is not happening. I know that there's a lot of you that tune into that. I'm not sure if there's a plan on putting some other video. Andy, you can nod. There is. Okay. They're probably going to put some other video up in place of the traditional crew that helms that show. And then also those other people that are cool enough to attend the benefit dinner will be with us in Chicagoland area. So we got a lot to talk about. I've got like 8 pages of notes, which is abnormal for a show like this. And that's because we've got a couple of opening chit-chat segments that I wanted to get to. The first one is based off of something that Jim and I were discussing yesterday, and it's pretty interesting. But Patrick T. Brown, who is a climate scientist who has written about a number of climate change issues, came out recently and revealed the distortions that come from prestigious academic journals in order to push a climate change narrative. So recently, he wrote a piece in the Free Press where in it he wrote, "The paper I just published, Climate Warming Increases Extreme Daily Wildfire Growth Risk in California," focus exclusively on how climate change has affected extreme wildfire behavior. I knew not to try to quantify key aspects other than climate change in my research because it would dilute the story that prestigious journals like Nature and its rival Science want to tell. This matters because it is critically important for scientists to be published in high profile journals. In many ways, they are gatekeepers for career success in academia. And the editors of these journals have made it abundantly clear, both in what they publish and what they reject, that they want climate papers that support certain pre approved narratives, even when those narratives come at the expense of broader knowledge for society. So, Jim, I mean, that is pretty damning. What do you have to say about this?
Well, yeah. So this is I'm kind of conflicted on it actually. And Patrick T. Brown, I actually follow him on Twitter, and he had a long Twitter thread about this. Where he says he tells on himself and frankly the entire professional climate alarmist industry, which dominates academia. But he told the story about how he had written a paper that didn't focus blame on climate change and for whatever you're observing in nature. And when they blame climate change, what they really mean, of course, is human activity causing and driving climate change. So we have to restrict our freedoms and rearrange our entire society because of climate change, because humans are causing climate change. And he talked about how when he was a young scientist, he had written a paper that was honest and looked at the data objectively, and it weighed the effect of climate change on a particular natural phenomena, but it really wasn't the driving factor. And he wrote it honestly. And he said that he didn't even get. Not only was it not published, not only did it not even get to peer review in the academic journal, the editors rejected it out of hand. So then he discovered that I have to blame human activity for all the natural calamities you can think of to even have it considered and published somewhere. And in this particular case, he was writing a paper on wildfires and the causes, just wildfire, right? And he says, climate change is a factor, but it is dwarfed by other factors, such as probably the number one is bad forest management. We're not logging as much as we used to because of environmental concerns, and so there's all this brush that will be there and that will catch fire, and that makes it worse. And climate change wasn't number one, but he still said so. Why? Because he wanted to get it published. And so I guess now he just feels a little guilty about it. And I think it's really great that he has come out publicly and said that this is how the academic journal, when it comes to climate, this is how the academic journal world works. We here at the Heartland Institute, we've known this for a very long time. The scientists that we work with have been telling us these stories for literally decades. The late, great Pat Michaels gave a keynote address about 4 or 5 Heartland climate conferences ago, where he focused on this very thing. And he was very concerned that while he was concerned because you have to be basically an older, almost retired, tenure level professor in order to tell the truth about the climate. Because if you go against the narrative, your career, you won't have a career. Or if you had a career established, you will have your career ruined. And so this is first person account proof that a young scientist, if he wants to follow the data, if he wants to tell people the truth about what's happening to the planet, he has no incentive to do so. In fact, it's all disincentives, because if he tells the truth, he will never have a career. He will never have a tenure track professor career at any university. And look, we all want to have job security. We all want to advance our careers. And so the truth is that the entire system is set up to lie to us about what is really happening to the planet. And I guess, I was joking. It's like, again, we want Patrick to be on. We want Patrick T. Brown to be on Climate Change Roundtable. Perhaps not this Friday, but maybe the Friday after. We are reaching out to him, but it reminded me of Henry Hill from Goodfellas. This is a guy. He's almost like the climate mafia informant. I'm glad that he's telling the truth. It doesn't wipe away all the sins of basically academic. We'll say fraud, academic fraud, because if your conclusions, if your data shows X, but you say Y in order to advance an agenda or even to get published, that's not honest science. That's not honest academic research. That is fake. It is a lie. And so, I'm glad that he is informing on, really the climate alarmist mafia out there in academia. And, maybe this is, I always say this, hoping it's true. I've not seen any evidence that this would be true, but perhaps this is such a significant admission that it starts to, put a crack in the wall of lies that we've been staring at when it comes to climate for the last 2 decades.
Yeah, well, we can keep our fingers crossed on that. Chris, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is supposed to be academic journals here. This isn't supposed to be, a tabloid where the editor says, "Oh yeah, this is good, but make it more salacious. I want juicier details on what Paris Hilton's doing." Like this is crazy.
Couple of things come to my mind. One of them being when you opened up your most recent book, you talked about the military-industrial complex, but you also went deeper into that speech and how Eisenhower warned about the scientific-industrial complex. And I think this is kind of that coming to fruition. So I'm kind of of two minds in terms of this this gentleman in his article, because on one hand he did succumb to the mob and he put he made the article seem as if climate change was the main factor, but then kind of, I think, cowardly after the fact, after he gets all the recognition in the in the scientific journal, then he comes out and says, "Oh, by the way, I kind of fudged these numbers and I kind of lied about that stuff, and here's why I think this matters, because we're going to talk about this. Maybe a couple other outlets will cover this, but the vast majority of the mainstream media are not going to cover this. So this is just yet another scientific paper that's supposedly going to reinforce the dominant narrative that everything is, everything that's related to climate change is caused by, humans and, carbon dioxide emissions." So, I kind of, in one way, I'm congratulating him. I'm glad that he's doing this, but then he's also, he's playing both sides. He's kind of sitting right on the fence. He's saying, I still want to get that special recognition from my friends in academia and go to the, to the cool parties and be one of them. But after the fact, I'm then going to, say, hey, by the way, I kind of lied about this and that. But the mainstream media is not going to pick that up. So, right. I think it's kind of a hollow victory in ways.
Well, we were kicking this around on Heartland's Slack channels this week. And Sterling Burnett, the head of our Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy, he had noted that Patrick Brown had written in the Free Press article, quote, "Although climate change is a factor in California wildfires, evidence suggests that other factors, which we couldn't talk about in the Nature paper and get published, may be playing an even greater role." And Sterling said, this is like a witness taking the stand and only keeping the first part of the oath, which is to tell the truth, and omitting, by misleading, by omission, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So when you leave out the fact that climate change is maybe ranked 3rd or 4th on the reasons for wildfires in the state of California, that's not actually telling the truth at all. It's by leaving that out. These lies of omission are what have gotten us to this place. And, I've long said, and I'm really proud of the work the Heartland Institute does, supporting the work of scientists who look at the data and come to the correct conclusions, at least in their minds, because the data does not show that humans are causing a climate crisis. And I've long thought, and I think this is actually a more evidence that this is true. If you're able to kick the legs out under the alarmist science that has been dominating academia and published journals, if you're able to do that, the entire edifice of climate change control, government control to stop climate change, collapses completely. That's why they have to lie to us and to the media, who are just complicit in in the lies. So that's why only lies can get into these peer-reviewed journals, as a lot of the scientists we work with call it. It's not peer review, it's pal review.
Mhm.
And only your pals in the club get to be public.
Yeah, I want I kind of wish that climate change roundtable was happening tomorrow, because I would love to hear Sterling and Anthony talk about this, because like I know Sterling has talked in previous episodes about the shortcomings of the peer review process, and I can't parrot the things that he would have to say off the top of my head, but I remember thinking like, wow, that's pretty damning. Like, like these people just like, oh yeah, it looks good, and moves it on. They don't actually like check it or make sure the science lines up or anything. It's just like, all right, rubber stamp, sounds good, and move on. And then also, do you remember and this kind of goes to Chris's point, like, hopefully this doesn't just disappear in the next news cycle and we all forget about this, because you remember like 5 years ago, there was like a handful of people that came out that showed that they were just making up fake studies about, like, they're just using as much academic jargon and coming up with ridiculous topics for studies that were like rape culture observed in dog parks or something like that, and they would just pretty it up with academic sounding verbiage and then put it out there, and it would get published, and they got like 20 completely bogus papers published in respected peer-reviewed publications, and they showed like that this is an indictment of the peer review process, and that no one actually looked at this stuff. They just thought it looked good, it had some key buzzwords in it, and they published it. And that happened like 5 years ago. And was there any fallout from that? Like, I think it was just like a little pie in the face or egg on the face for like a week, and then we all moved on. And I'm hoping that this doesn't kind of fall in that same kind of category of just like, oh yeah, we forgot about it.
Well, I've got another apt comparison. I'm old enough to remember ClimateGate and how that was, brushed under the rug by the mainstream media, even though we know for a fact that these so-called climate scientists were getting together and just making up data. And I thought that would have blown the lid on the entire climate change charade, but fortunately here we are 20 something years later, and they're still at it, and they're still making hand over fist, and it's sad.
The peer review process is the most secure and free system ever, right? We just have to repeat that over and over again. All right, well, let's move on to our main topic. I had another thing that I wanted to bring up, but for sake of time, let's just get to the COVID stuff. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about a few stories relating to COVID restrictions creeping back up into a number of places in America, some colleges, some certain businesses. Well, this trend looks like it's continuing. More places are bringing back masks. I have one story in the show notes where Maryland public elementary schools are reinstating COVID mask requirements, ordering some students to wear N95 masks while in the buildings. Looks like New York is gearing up to do the same. There's a smattering of other schools around the country that are doing likewise. And this is all happening because of a new strain we discussed on the show a couple of weeks ago, variant BA 2.48. Check my work on that, because that's just off the top of my head. So this one, might be more severe, might not be. The jury is still out on that. However, it is resulting in an uptick of cases. So I think we have a chart somewhere here showing the uptick in hospitalizations as it relates to COVID. Can we show that chart there, Andy? And then go ahead and zoom in a little bit, because I'm not sure people can see the uptick. Just keep zooming in. Can we zoom in even further, because I don't think we can see the uptick yet. It's very small. Just trust me, it's there. There we go. Slide it over. There it is. You see it? We might have to zoom in a little bit further if possible. There is an uptick. Just trust me, everyone. There's an uptick there.
Hey, Donnie, I hate to interrupt. I'm sorry, but just keep in mind for our viewers and listeners that when we're talking about COVID hospitalizations, we are not talking about people that are hospitalized because of COVID. We are talking about people that are hospitalized with COVID. So that means that if you broke your arm and you go into the hospital because you have to get a test and you test positive for COVID, you're counted as a COVID hospitalization. If you're in a car accident and you go to the hospital and you've got, a broken leg, whatever, and you happen to have COVID, you are counted as a COVID-19 hospitalization. So that is a very, very important thing that we need to make sure that the viewers and listeners understand, because these are not people who are in the hospital strictly due to COVID. They are in the hospital and they happen to have COVID.
Fair point. Fair point. So all of this is kind of bringing back the whole mask debate, which is, stirring up all of the kind of political winds that surround the idea of bringing back masks, mask mandates, the effectiveness of masks. We're having this conversation again. And lately, Dr. Anthony Fauci was on CNN, where, credit to CNN, he was presented with facts about a report stating very clearly that masks did nothing to reduce the spread of COVID. We have a video of this exchange, so let's go ahead and play that clip labeled Fauci masks, please.
Brett Stevens in The Times talked about Cochrane. Put that on the screen. The most rigorous and comprehensive analysis of scientific studies conducted on the efficacy of masks for reducing the spread of respiratory illness, including COVID-19, was published last month. Its conclusions, said Tom Jefferson, the Oxford epidemiologist who is the lead author, were unambiguous. There is just no evidence that masks, make any difference, he told the journalist Mayan Damasi, full stop. But wait, hold on. What about the N95 masks as opposed to the lower quality surgical or cloth masks? Makes no difference. None of it, he said. Well, what about the studies that initially persuaded policymakers to impose mask mandates? They were convinced by non-randomized studies, flawed observational studies. How do we get beyond that finding of that particular review?
Yeah, but there are other studies, Michael, that show at an individual level for individual. When you're talking about the effect on the epidemic or the pandemic as a whole, the data are less strong.
Yeah. Did you see the CNN guy's eyes just how are you saying this? I just told you, concrete studies show it's all BS, and your response is, well, there's some other studies. Give me a break. And I wondered this last time, Jim, when we talked about COVID. It's are we as a society, or at least our policy leaders, whatever political leaders, did they learn anything from the last time around? Are we doomed to do all of the same thing again, regardless of how pointless and ineffective and potentially socially detrimental these practices were? Are we doomed for that?
Yeah, I guess so. I think the reason is that the people in our government, our authorities, our ruling class, were wrong about nearly every single aspect of COVID, from detection to policy to getting shots. I mean, this video is going to be demonetized and maybe even banned. I'm also just say vaccines. I'm also say COVID. We had 2 weeks ago, the title of our podcast was COVID, the election variant. So, let's just go ahead and get the channel in big trouble. But they were never held accountable. There was no penalty for being completely 100% wrong about nearly everything when it comes to COVID. And now, what do you know? There's an election coming again. And suddenly we're talking about a supposed uptick in COVID cases, which, as we saw from the chart we just put on the screen, it is so small you need a magnifying glass to see it. That it's not like a year ago. We're lower than we were a year ago at this time. And there was no talk about any of this stuff. But suddenly we're going to bring masks back. And it's because these power mad, way too powerful bureaucrats. Did you know that Anthony Fauci is not in that position anymore? He's now retired, pulling down the largest government pension of anybody who's ever lived, even more than presidents do. So he's retired. He's pulling that down. Plus all the money he's going to be making from Big Pharma on the side that he hasn't already, if he hasn't already made it when he was in office. That happened too. No accountability. No response. Nobody takes any responsibility. So they actually think they can come forward again after they've completely destroyed the credibility of public health experts in government, and that they can tell people to wear masks again. And it's the gaslighting is almost too much to take, because they will say, Fauci will say to this day that he didn't want anybody to shut anything down, that he wasn't mandating masks. These were just suggestions, putting aside the fact that the entire they scared everybody so much about COVID that the entire world did what they were told by the experts who didn't know what they were doing. If you gave them the benefit of the doubt, they just didn't know what they were doing. And they were trying to do the best they can. They weren't doing any of that, actually. You can't give them the benefit of the doubt. They were purposely pushing lies. in order to control you, to basically change all the election laws on the fly to benefit a particular political party. That was a huge bonus, all to get Trump out of the White House. And so if they think they're going to now just kind of soft pedal this whole thing about wearing masks again, we talked about this on the pod 2 weeks ago. It may be, you may have to make some sacrifices, but you cannot comply. If the FAA, and this is what's really being hinted at now, that the federal government is going to require masks again when you fly on airplanes, I guess you're going to have to cancel all your vacation plans. I guess you're going to have to do your business trip that you were going to do and do that on Zoom instead. Do whatever it takes to not comply with this. If there was a restaurant, and this is amazing that this was happening too, restaurants would not let you inside unless you were wearing a mask. Never visit that restaurant again. It should be out of business. You should remember the ones actually that did that and not buy any food from them anymore. I am not going to walk up and down a grocery store one aisle at a time and stay on my sticker 6 feet away from somebody. If any store puts that crap up again, I'm never going to patronize that place again. This cannot be allowed to happen again because it is, one, unscientific, and it is humiliating. The purpose of making you put a piece of cloth on your face that science shows does nothing to stop the spread of COVID-19, to put that on is to be a serf, a subject of your government, and not a free person. I will not put a mask on again. Anywhere, any activity that requires me to wear one, that activity in place is out of my life forever. That's it. That's the only way this can be stopped.
And that includes scuba diving. Those are the thoughts and feelings and opinions of Jim Lakely, not necessarily reflective of Stopping Socialism TV. Just an FYI, YouTube censors. Chris, your thoughts on this? I have a feeling that when Fauci inevitably writes his first book, the cover is just going to be a big full-length picture of him, and it's just going to be titled "The Man That Single-Handedly Saved the World." The guy is an egomaniac. What are your thoughts on all this?
I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the pandemic, and I firmly believe, and I think the evidence really shows that Dr. Fauci and his grotesque lab in Wuhan, China, that he was supplying millions of dollars, from the U.S. government and through non-government organizations, is the reason why COVID, occurred in the first place. And I am sticking to that. Him and his, crazy, we need to make a, genetically modified virus so that we can then, understand it, but it doesn't exist in nature. So I hold him accountable and responsible for the entire pandemic in the first place. I think he got away with him, in front of the U.S. Senate committee. And I think Dr. Fauci lied under oath. So I'm still on that. And I will not get off that, that mission, because I think that somehow, some way, Dr. Fauci, through his lies and through, we have the emails to show that he was lying through his teeth in the first couple of days of the pandemic, trying to take the spotlight away from the fact that him and his colleagues were the ones who brought this to the world in the first place. So I'm still hoping somehow that he is held accountable for this, because he is the reason why we suffered through that pandemic. And I don't care if we get banned. Sorry.
The thoughts and opinions of Chris Talgo, everybody.
Yeah.
Not necessarily reflective of.
Yeah, but reflective of the evidence, reflective of data, reflective of common sense. I mean, I'm still shocked that some people are still buying this bogus lie that, it was in the Wuhan, wet market, and we never found the pangolin and the bat. And, how did they get, I'm still just very disappointed that 3 years later, we have not had a full accounting of that. I know that the United Nations, I know that the World Health Organization were, playing, basically, covering up the fact that this happened because of, their insane genetically modifying, viruses. So it's just so disappointing that he got away with this. And Donnie, I mean, just everything he says about masks, what a what liar.
We got another
almost
video.
Said it. But I wrote about this recently, and Dr. Fauci is just so full of what, because on, what was it? I think it was like February 21st or something, he sent an email to a colleague, and this is from a Freedom of Information Act, saying masks don't do anything, don't worry about anything. You're going to like, because the person had asked him, hey, I'm traveling to this place, should I be worried? And he was like, no, you have nothing to worry about. Masks are worthless. You're a healthy adult. You've got nothing to worry about. So Dr. Fauci lied. And I have my personal reasons why I think he lied. I think it was a lot of political stuff, but the fact that he's even on CNN and people are taking him seriously at this point just irks me to no end. Dr. Fauci should just be like, he should be a laughing stock,
That would be ideal. Yeah. I laugh out of sadness when I see him on CNN to this day. But Joe Biden, shifting gears a little bit, Joe Biden says he's going to ask Congress for funding to develop a new COVID vaccine, one in which he will recommend everybody take. And I think recommend should be the key word here. I think when it comes to public policy like this, recommend quickly turns into an offer that you can't refuse. So yeah, when he says recommend, take that with a grain of salt. And as we have seen from our years of COVID, the vaccine didn't live up to the claims that they were originally pitching it with.
Don't call it a vaccine. It's not a
vaccine. You see how
don't call it a vaccine. Don't call it a vaccine.
They changed the definition.
They changed the definition of a vaccine. It's a treatment that they kind of hope works. And yeah,
I'm going by 2023 standards, not your archaic 2019 standards, Chris.
The way Chris is going on, I can't believe you were worried about what I say. I know. Seriously. By Chris
I'm sorry, but when it comes to COVID and the fact that that almost ruined society, and being a former teacher, I understand how much this ruined the lives of so many millions of students across this country, and how it tore families apart, how just the ramifications and the fallout from COVID-19 we're going to experience for decades to come. This is not the lockdowns are done, we're out of the clear now. No way. This is having a continued impact on teenagers' mental health, people's just it's so maddening.
Well, what it's done, Chris, among a lot of things that it's done that is bad and sick for society, is that it has convinced healthy people that they're the problem. This is the first pandemic in history where we quarantined the healthy and kept people away from each other and made healthy people who are not sick wear masks. It's insane. But now apparently that is so ingrained into our culture that they actually think people will go along with it again.
I mean, I'll take an even more conspiratorial stance, Donnie. How about this? I think that to some degree they wanted it to be as bad as possible, because you know what? They knew early on that being outside, exercising, eating healthy food, those were things that could actually, do something to prevent COVID-19 from having a very, negative impact on people. However, they closed down the gyms. They didn't allow people to go outside. They didn't allow people to run outside. In California, they didn't even allow people to go like windsurfing. So that just shows me that they were trying to use this as a political cudgel to do whatever they wanted to do. I have my thoughts as to what those things were, but I will let our viewers and listeners determine that for themselves.
Yes, right. I love all of your guys' opinions, YouTube. Their opinions, their ideas. Don't shut us down for talking. This is a core thing of America. We have to be able to talk, even if they are conspiracies. I love conspiracies. I run with the best of them when it comes to conspiracies. What's not a conspiracy is that even our First Lady Jill Biden, who surely has been double vaxxed and triple boosted, got COVID recently, potentially infecting our dear beloved president. Luckily, we have some clarification on the matter from our very competent White House press secretary. We have a clip here that Jim, you put together. So why don't we go ahead and play the clip, and then you can kind of walk us through it, either as it goes or at the very end.
There'll be an updated vaccine mid-September, I believe. So we know that, as you all know, vaccinations against COVID-19 remains the safest protection for avoiding hospitalization, long-term health outcomes, and death, which is why we are going to be encouraging Americans to stay up to date on their vaccines. President Biden tested negative last night for COVID-19 and tested negative again today. He's not experiencing any symptoms. As far as the steps he is taking, since the president was with the First Lady yesterday, he will be masking while indoors and around people in alignment with CDC guidance. And as has been the practice in the past, the president will remove his mask when sufficiently distanced from others indoors and while outside as well.
A few moments later.
And here's Biden now. He's not wearing a mask at a ceremony giving the Medal of Honor to an 81-year-old hero. His face was about 4 inches away from the guy's mouth and nose for about 5 minutes. Again, this is a COVID-exposed president we have here. And there's nobody in this room with people clapping for this great American hero, Larry Taylor. Nobody in the room is wearing a mask.
Right.
Nobody.
How about the fact
benefit of our audio only listeners?
How about the fact that the president of the United States didn't even stay for the ceremony because he has no clue what's going on and just started walking through the press corps? And you can see, if you looked closely at the reaction, that people were like, what is he doing right now?
Yeah.
But, that's just, par for the course for, President Doofus.
Yeah, the press secretary says that he's not showing any symptoms. She should clarify and say any symptoms of COVID. There's symptoms of other things that he is definitely suffering from, which resulted in him just walking out of the room during the middle of the ceremony, during this Medal of Honor awarding thing. So, yeah, it's just, God, we are just in such bizarre times, Jim.
We do. I mean, I'm always trying to compare the media's reaction to these kinds of things that Biden does to how they react to everything that Trump did.
Oh yeah.
If Trump just hung the Medal of Honor around some old guy, and then as they're all clapping for him, walked out as if the applause is for you. If Trump did that, we would never hear the end of it. It'd be leading all of the news. These sorts of things Biden does on a daily basis, and it passes without mention by anybody. So it was very disrespectful. I mean, maybe he just forgot. He's often at the end of events, like looking and pointing. And do I go here? Do I go there? Are we done? Where am I supposed to go? So maybe this is just another case where, his minder, his handler, was not paying attention and just let him wander off. Old grandpa. Sometimes he just walks away. That's not good.
Well, I don't want to get too sidetracked on the what's wrong with Joe Biden segment here. We got to stick to COVID, our main topic. Jim,
we do. But my point being, just real quick, that again, do not comply, because your own president and everybody and all the elites in the media that were at that event are not complying either. Right. She had just said that day that he's going to be wearing a mask to protect himself and others, because this is very serious, you guys. And so he's going to be wearing a mask, and then immediately he doesn't wear a mask.
Yeah, somebody check in on that guy.
If they're not going to take their own advice, I'm not going to comply.
Donnie, I was just going to say one quick thing. The White House, press secretary is a very important position because she is the mouthpiece for the president. And I do not want to pick on Karine Jean-Pierre by any means. However, she has just gotten up there and just lied through her teeth multiple times. I remember, on the July 4th weekend when they found the cocaine in the White House, how she said the Bidens were not here on Friday. They left 2 days ago. No, that's just completely not true. The Bidens were there that day. She then, a couple of days ago says, President Biden's, going to do all these things, and he just doesn't do them. So, I mean, I know that that's not an exact comparison there, but for her to just get out there and just say things that are just, fundamentally not true, it really, I think, makes the American people lose confidence in the administration. And I think that is happening before our eyes. I think the polls are clearly demonstrating that.
Yeah, she's a horrible liar. Who said that in the chat there? She's a horrible liar. She needs more training. Yeah, because she needs to be a better liar. That's what you. Right. That's the skill you need to be a press secretary. In this day and age, you have to be a good liar. But Jim, there was another segment, or another video that you have lined up for us that kind of reiterates that idea. Maybe this is the theme of this segment of just not learning from the past. So you prepared a clip of Fauci talking about masks and vaccines from 2021. Do you want to set that up, or do you want to just play it and talk about it afterwards?
I'll set it. Andy can hit play in a second, but yeah, just to set it up, I found this because I wanted to find videos of actually what I did is I tried to search for a video of Fauci talking about double masking, and so because it was so absurd. It was so absurd, but people were buying it. I mean, I know people who wore 2 masks all the time. I know people who would not come near me because I was not wearing a mask. And I just wanted to remind people of the smiling face of societal tyranny and the destruction, the smiling face that destroyed our lives and destroyed businesses and destroyed the way we interact with each other. So this is how fun and happy it was back in 2021, just to demand that people put a rag over their face.
All right, go ahead and play the video. And I will warn that I've watched this like 6 times already, so forgive me if I'm gouging my eyes out by the end of it. Go ahead.
Let's talk about this mask thing, because now the CDC says, I mean, I think I've got this right. 1 mask is better than 0 masks. 2 masks is better than 1 mask, but you don't have to have double masks. Is that right? I mean,
it is. In fact,
so complicated.
You and I had this conversation on your show. I mean, it must have been a month or so ago, because someone had said, I've seen people wear 2 masks. The recommendation is not that you have to wear it. What the CDC is saying, that at minimum, wear a mask. Okay, this is what they're saying. Make sure you wear a mask. So you wear a mask. Then you want it to fit better. So one of the ways you could do it, if you would like to, is put a cloth mask over, which actually here and here and here, where you could get leakage in, is much better contained. Okay. That's all they're saying. 1 mask at least, but if you want to really be sure, get a tighter fit with the second mask.
But if grandma's vaccinated but grandkid isn't?
Yeah, then you got to be careful, because grandma could still get virus in her nasopharynx, even though the vaccine is preventing her from getting physically ill. Even though the vaccine is preventing her from getting physically ill, she still could have virus in her nasopharynx. And that's the reason why we say, until we have the overwhelming majority of people vaccinated and the level of virus is very low, when you're vaccinated, it would be prudent to wear a mask for the reason that I just mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jim, there's your favorite guy talking about all this stuff that we know is misinformation now, but again, we're not going to learn from it. We're not going to hold anyone accountable. We're just going to go full force into the next era in the same thing.
Right. Well, the stuff that Fauci was saying there, almost everything he said there was untrue. And so we see the studies that masks don't work to prevent the spread of coronaviruses or respiratory viruses. They're not effective at it at all. He knew that, and he was telling people to double and triple mask. The reason I wanted to play that video and put that together is because the smiling, the laughing, the glee that he seems to take of bossing people around and telling them that how they must live their lives. Telling you, we have to remember, wasn't that long ago where Dr. Fauci was the one who would tell us how many people we could have over for Thanksgiving. We are not going back to that world. We are not going back to the world where a smiling face on the Today Show is advising, their audience to humiliate themselves and cover their faces with 2 or even 3 masks, because if you don't do that, grandma's in big trouble. And also, I had that little record scratch in there because Fauci admitted, well, if grandma has the shot, she's not going to get physically ill. Then why are you wearing a mask? If you give grandma COVID or something, I don't know, whatever happens, if she's not going to get physically ill, what the hell is all this for? And this is on top of both him and Biden and other giants in the media telling us that if you get the shot, you won't get COVID. Or then it was, if you get the shot, it won't be so bad. Or if you get the shot, you won't go to the hospital. All the studies show that all of that was garbage. And why this is such an important issue, and why I think it's important for people to resist, is because we have to take back control of our lives. We have to be the ones who get to make a decision about what medicines we want to take, how we want to interact to keep ourselves and our family safe, and not have enormous governmental and societal pressure make those decisions for us. If we don't take that back fully right now, as they're starting to hint that, masks and vaccine mandates and all this stuff are coming back, if we don't fight back at that stuff, this might be our last chance for freedom, because I really thought the American people were not going to put up with this for more than a couple of weeks, especially when they said 2 weeks to slow the spread. When they knew that was a lie in the beginning, they always had this plan. And so I thought the American people were going to fight back then. They didn't. We cannot let this happen again.
So I have a new episode of Davos Watch coming up, but I got one more COVID related story that I want to talk to. It's actually 2 parts, but make sure you stay tuned for Davos Watch at the end of the episode here. So the last COVID related thing that I wanted to discuss kind of highlights an area in which I think the government has learned from the past in regards to COVID response. Except what they had learned is how to be more effective in enforcing lockdowns. So I have 2 stories that potentially illustrate this. Number 1 occurred over Labor Day weekend in New York, where the New York Police Department was using camera-equipped drones to surveil large gatherings, including parades and even backyard parties. So this new tactic was in response to violence in past years stemming from the West Indian American Day celebrations. Apparently that's a big thing over there. I don't know. Surely just this story in itself raises some red flags in regards to civil liberties, but my thoughts immediately went to the days during COVID where the government was cracking down on social gatherings and, like Jim said, telling us how many people we were allowed to have over at a house party. Remember those videos of police coming in and breaking up holiday parties because some neighbor snitched on them for having one too many people over? Well, now with this relatively new technology, we could just keep aerial surveillance and aerial tabs on everyone at all times, and just based on, I don't know, like the heat data or whatever, like, oh, there's 12 people over there, the limit is 10. Let's make sure to crack down on them. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this story? I know that you saw this idea of New York using drones to spy on people. What are your thoughts?
Very, very scary. They can use this for COVID-19. They can use this in the future for anything else that they deem it necessary to, watch and track us. Donnie, we've talked a lot about, the incoming technologies and how they do allow big government to easier track us, and how 100 years or so ago the likes of Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin would just be drooling at the mouth to have these instruments at their disposal. And here we are seeing in Brooklyn, New York, where they seem to be extremely worried about people hosting gatherings in their backyards. However, last time I checked, Brooklyn, New York, and New York City in general had a major crime problem. So why are they diverting precious resources? Because last time I also checked, NYC defunded their police to a certain degree. Why are they going after, suburban, families cooking out and just having a good time celebrating, the end of summer, when those precious resources would be much better used to prevent carjackings, beatings in the subway, rampant, shoplifting in, New York City stores. I mean, that could go on and on and on. Rapes, so just really good to know that they have their priorities in line. Really,
well, I'm pretty sure the carjackings are the car's fault now. So I think we got that established here in Chicago. Right. So Jim, I'll let you comment on both of these, but the other story that I wanted to bring up comes out of California, where a church that was previously fined over $1 million for breaking COVID lockdown mandates a few years ago is now suing the county over the county's alleged collection of cell phone data on the congregants of the church during this period of time. Geofencing tools and other cell phone scraping tools were used to track these churchgoers without boundary, seeing who went where when, even when that means going to the confessional box or even the bathroom. The plaintiff in the case is accusing the California county of violating its congregants' privacy and constitutional rights. But just imagine how this technology could be used to track people during COVID lockdowns. Well, according to your cell phone data, it shows that you went from one residential location to another. This doesn't count as essential travel. You have now been deducted 50 Schrute bucks.
Or climate change lockdowns. Oh, you're traveling too much. You're moving around too much.
Any number of things, but yeah, like Chris said, we talk about the new technology and all this different stuff that's coming down the pike, and it just opens the door for levels of mass surveillance not even dreamed about, 20, 30 years ago. It's unbelievable. But Jim, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, it reminds me, because speaking back to COVID, it reminds me of the whole idea of COVID passports. And it didn't really catch on, but it sure was pushed pretty darn hard Remember the whole contact tracing thing, that if you got COVID, you basically had to call everybody who you may have encountered, and then they could trace it all back to you. I mean, we lived in an absurd time. We lived in a time of absolute fear, panic, and ignorance. And again, we're not going to go back to that. But, we talk a lot about the World Economic Forum on this podcast, and talk about having an attitude of glee during a horrible time for the entire world. Klaus Schwab, couldn't get enough of COVID. He's like, wow, this is great. This is great. Everybody is so scared. They'll do whatever we tell them to do. We'll have all the recommendations. We have all the experts, and we have our acolytes in all the places of government, mostly around the West. Now we can just impose our will. And it actually makes it for a really great experiment to see how much we can get away with. And surely Klaus Schwab was tickled that the people complied so much. He never in his wildest dreams did he think it would be so easy to control so many by spreading fear of a disease that doesn't even kill all that many people. So now they're running out again. So this surveillance stuff, it's like, they were kind of experimenting with some of it during COVID. And so this is, again, if you watch the show Black Mirror, this is some of the dystopian future that we have to look forward to. And I had forgotten, Donnie, about one of the most depressing things about COVID and lockdowns and all of that were churches being shut down, were pastors being arrested for holding services in their own churches. They weren't kidnapping people and making them worship God. People came on their own, and people got into big trouble, and pastors were arrested. And now they want to trace everywhere you go. I'm gonna smash my cell phone with a hammer, like I used to work for Hillary Clinton, if this stuff starts happening.
I know. Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre stuff. But, that's the world that we're heading towards, everybody. Doesn't it just sound fantastic? And yeah, Jim, I mean, you say that, Klaus Schwab was gleeful about, COVID coming around. They were planning for it. This isn't a conspiracy. They had, what was it called? Event 201 or something like that. They had planned for all of this.
Wow, and I thought I was
coincidence. Coincidence. It was a coincidence. Wow. Chris, no conspiracy. It was a coincidence.
I thought I was, treading in deep water there.
No, just a coincidence.
It's like we're playing a game of conspiracy leapfrog here. Everybody just keeps one up for the other.
Okay, the moon landing was fake. The Titanic never sank. The world is flat. What else can I pull in my head here?
Right. JFK actually shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
JFK committed suicide, but
all right, let's
Lee Harvey Oswald was
okay, all right. We've got Davos Watch, episode 3 coming up. Let's go ahead and fingers crossed that this video works, everybody. Here we go. Let's start that bumper music. Success. Welcome to episode 3 of Davos Watch, where we keep an eye on the global elites from Davos to the UN and all the other advocates of global fascism and totalitarian technocracy. This week, our story comes from Axios and their new article titled "The Problem with America's High Home Ownership Rate." In this piece, author Felix Salmon, who is a chief financial correspondent with Axios and a participant of at least a few Davos conferences, writes, America's decades-long love affair with home ownership is holding back the economy, hobbling the Federal Reserve, and exacerbating a national housing crisis. We're stuck here now. At this point, there's just too much wealth stored in too many houses for anything to meaningfully change. The U.S. system has effectively locked millions of Americans into single homes, one that they can barely afford and might not even like very much. He goes through a couple of financial reasons why Americans would be better off if they just didn't own a home. And then he writes, Americans also take up millions of square feet of space that are desperately needed by a growing population. Can you just see right through all of this like I can? Like, oh, yeah, all of this is just inefficient use of land. It could be better used if the smart people that are living at the top, maybe our academic elite or anything like that, if they had their hands on the controls, they can do it better. Like, it just smells of that stuff, and it makes me it makes me sick. But that's a side thing. So, according to Felix here, this
Also,
is
you really think, Donnie?
yeah, this is a deeply inefficient distribution of where people live. Wow. Maybe I've read too many case studies about socialism countries, but this is starting to look like a couple of maybe Cambodia or something like that, this rhetoric. But again, that's aside from this point. So he also throws in some lines about how the market is illiquid and that home ownership leads to people being more likely to be opposed to development in their area, as it might impact the value of their house, and other stories that I've seen in a number of articles that touch on this subject. But like with my previous segment on the agricultural industry that we did last week, this boils down to the idea that if you just let the elites be in charge, and in this case, give up your ownership, that the collective will be much better off and much happier. So obviously, this article caught my attention because it fits in perfectly with a now infamous article once published by the World Economic Forum titled, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." In this article, originally published in 2016, but since removed, author Ida Auken, a Danish politician and member of the Social Democrats political party, described a world of the future where people didn't own anything. Everything from housing and transportation to clothes and appliances were all changed into services where people just rented access to these goods or services. Imagine the Netflix model of watching media, but applied to everything. You don't own the media, you just pay a monthly fee for the privilege of accessing that media. And you might instinctively understand the problems associated with this model, but before I lay out any of those, I want to cover a couple of things of context. So first off, this is a narrative that the World Economic Forum, their associates, and others have been pushing for a while. This Axios article is not a unique thing. I've come across a whole bunch of articles like this. There is one recently, maybe a year or so, by Carl Smith, wrote a piece in Bloomberg titled, "America Should Become a Nation of Renters." Shane Phillips wrote in The Atlantic, "Renting is terrible. Owning is worse." And the World Economic Forum has many articles about home rentals, aside from the "In the Future You'll Own Nothing" article. Also, they have a number of articles supporting the idea of shared economies. One article we covered on this podcast was about a proposed increase in car sharing as a way to get fewer cars on the road. So there's a ton of material out on this. I'm just not going to list off every single thing. And now you might think, practically speaking, this is an infeasible idea. I think even Felix mentions this, that all of this is kind of locked into place. What can we do? What are we going to do? Outlaw owning a home? Yeah, good luck with that. But that brings me to the next point that I want to make, is that we are already seeing signs of this. We're already seeing signs that we're moving towards a rentership society. And this all kind of started in 2011, when the housing market was at its lows after the Great Recession. And there was a disturbing trend of corporations purchasing single-family homes en masse and turning them into rental properties. And this trend was seemingly kicked off by a single report released by Morgan Stanley that is an official partner, by the way, official partner of the World Economic Forum. The report in part outlined a shift in attitudes towards a rentership society. The report forecasted, quote, "a surge in the number of renters and a potentially massive opportunity for investors to convert a glut of repossessed homes into rental properties." So prior to this report, prior to 2011, the idea of corporate landlords owning massive amounts of rental homes was just not a thing. Wasn't a thing. Maybe there was a couple of companies out there that owned a bunch of homes in an area or something like that. But this large scale, massive corporations owning thousands of homes was just not a thing. So this is a trend that's only over about a decade old, but it's starting to spread far and wide. So corporations like Blackstone, not to be confused with BlackRock, and other investment corporations began pouring billions of dollars into snatching up as many homes as they could get their hands on. We're talking about tens of thousands of homes being purchased by corporations and turned into rentals. And we have some quotes where some of these corporations are dreaming about how one day their corporation is going to own properties in the millions so that they can turn it into rentals for everybody. So then what happens if the World Economic Forum allied corporations buy up as many homes as possible? And sometimes in certain cases, especially in I think Tampa Bay area was the one that was hardest hit by this trend, that a house would go up on the market within minutes. These corporations would use an algorithm and just snatch it right up. So what would happen if we're stuck in a system, we're stuck in a country where renting from a corporation is like the only way to find shelter? Well, there are two major things in my estimation. One is a very important thing. We're talking about financial ramifications. A house will be the biggest purchase and investment of many Americans' lives. General house appreciation has and will provide valuable equity and retirement nest eggs for millions of Americans. So in a world where we just rent, all of those benefits are just, thrown out the window. But possibly more importantly is the liberty issue. So great freedom comes along with owning a home. In general, it's your home, it's your property. You're free to do with it what you want. This freedom disappears when somebody else owns it. A good rule to remember when discussing any of these services that might replace ownership, from media and streaming services to cars and Uber, or homes and rentals, is that when you don't own something, somebody else does, and they get to make the rules. So if a landlord doesn't want you to own a pet, it's their house. They make the rules. And this goes for a whole bunch of other restrictions. There's restrictions on rental properties for smoking, hosting parties, in some case, even drinking alcohol. Landlords are given a lot of leeway when it comes to restricting certain things that their tenants can do on their properties. Now, this isn't necessarily a big issue when it comes to a free market, because if Bob, the landlord, doesn't want you to have a dog in his property, well, you just go find a different landlord that doesn't enforce such a restriction. It's when this housing is controlled by a small number of big corporations where this becomes a huge threat, especially when those small number of big corporations are adhering to a credit system like, I don't know, ESG. Under this system, massive amounts of control are forfeited to corporations and the ruling elite that construct these ESG rules. And like I've said before in regards to ESG, all of these rules are fluid and subjective. While today they might be used to mandate green homes or low flow water efficient toilets and showers in your place of residence, tomorrow they could be used to restrict you from, I don't know, possessing a firearm in your residence. And this isn't a constitutional matter we're talking about, because in the future where you own nothing and these ESG compliant corporations own everything, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It's the Davos elite that are making these ESG rules, not you. So, and by the way, that idea of a landlord telling you that you can't own or possess a firearm while you're in their residence, that is very legal in, I think, at least 48 states in the country. So that is not a total, a straw man there by any means. So like I said last time, and we'll say at the end of each one of these segments, these plans and organizations are incredibly influential and well-connected, and oftentimes the things that they do and say go largely ignored, and they go ignored at our own peril, which is why I'm doing Davos Watch. Every week, I intend to shine a light on some element of the global elites, and I hope you stay tuned so that you can stay informed.
Forget it, Donnie, you're out of your element.
Chris, I want to go to you first on this. What do you think about this future where we don't own anything when it comes to housing, and just the idea that someone would have the gall of releasing an article on Axios talking about how great it would be for us to get rid of our home ownership? It just seems unbelievable to me.
All right, I'm going to go way back in time here. Okay. Are we going to be able to go a little bit over time here?
We're already over time. Let's do it.
Okay. So 1970s Community Reinvestment Act was passed under Jimmy Carter. Okay. Community Reinvestment Act basically told banks you have to provide loans to people who do not exactly have great credit scores, because in America, basically, housing, is the American dream, and we want to incentivize housing. Fast forward, 30 years later, the banks were forced to give so much, so many, terrible loans to people that what happened? It led to the housing crisis of 2008, 2009. After that happened, you had a bunch of people that, were forced out of their homes, and foreclosures were, very, very prevalent across the country. the banks, the big banks, like you said, Morgan Stanley and some of the others, they did have the funds, the cash to go in there and swoop those up at bargain costs. Okay. So, I mean, I think that is necessary to kind of like understand like how we got to that point. And I also think that it's very important to take into account that the past couple of years, home ownership is really, really unaffordable because the interest rates are so high because of the, inflation and all the other like economic, problems that we're experiencing. So I think that this is a multifaceted problem. I don't think there's an easy solution to this. I agree with you that I think the forces, at large want to be, want to be able to leverage their power to, to hold people under their thumb so that they, have to abide by their rules. And I agree with you that home ownership is a great thing because it, you've got skin in the game. And home ownership is also great because it, promotes, communities and promotes, neighborhoods. And, I was lucky enough to grow up in a small town north of Chicago, and I lived in, a home, and, we had, friends and family and neighbors, and we all came together and, did great things. And, we had a, charmed life. However, I think, if people are going to live in a constant reshuffling of the deck where they're constantly moving and they're constantly renting, you're not going to have that sort of, solid foundation in communities, cities, and just everywhere across the country. So I think that this has, cultural, ramifications. Obviously, it's got economic ramifications. And Donnie, I just think, the commonality of everything that we've discussed in this podcast and that we discuss in most of our podcasts is control. And it's about control. It's about forcing you to wear a mask. It's about, forcing you to, to live under the dictates of these, of these, giant corporations and the rules that they set forth. And I think that is just having a very deleterious effect on the fabric of our nation. So I think this is just a very, insidious problem that goes far beyond whether or not you own a home or not, because I think that it just strikes at the heart of the American dream, which is to go and, own a home and for the next generation to be better off than their parents. Sadly, in my family, my parents have 5 kids. Only one of us owns a home. And that's because, it's so unaffordable for so many, people in my, cohort. Jim, I'm sure that you can attest to this, that, people in their, 20s and 30s, it's just very difficult for them to get ahead these days. So I think this is just part and parcel to the, overall, broad swath problem that we're facing, across the country as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be 53 years old here very soon. For most of my life, I have rented. I was born in New York City, and of course, we had a rented apartment. And then my family owned homes in Dayton, Ohio, and then Pittsburgh. But for most of my life, I was a renter. It's only relatively recently that we purchased our own home. And when you've rented for a long time, and then you become a homeowner, you immediately notice a very big difference. Your level of mental stability increases. Your sense of safety increases tremendously. Mm-hmm. You own where you live. You make the rules, unless you live in a place but a homeowners association. That's pretty restrictive. I don't, so I'm fortunate that way. But you get to rule the way you live. You're not dependent. Basically, there's always a sense of anxiety that the landlord will raise the rent, of course, or he'll sell the property and somebody new will double the rent, or suddenly he'll say you can't have pets, or he's not taking care of the property the right way, and you're not allowed to do anything about it. I mean, there's that. All of those things are part of renting that are not great. And this Axios, in homeownership is completely different, because if your home is broken, if something's broken, believe me, I have fixed a lot of things around here, but I enjoy it. You can do it, and you do it yourself. And so that sense of ownership and autonomy, it's not called the American dream for nothing. The American dream is freedom, and there's really no more sense of a sense of living free in America more than owning your own home. And so that's why it was an aspiration for generations, and still should be an aspiration. And if interest rates were a little lower, maybe the younger generations could get a little bit ahead. But look, you shouldn't expect to, with rare exceptions, you shouldn't expect to buy a home until you are basically middle-aged. That's when you start earning enough money to be able to afford it. In general, I know that from my own, I'm Gen X. I know that from my own generation. Most of my friends didn't own their own home until they were in their 40s. So, it's tough, but it's a dream worth aspiring for. But this Axios, when you were reading this, Donnie, this Axios story just kind of really triggered me. I thought, who the hell do you think you are? This is basically what you're reading this stuff. It's like, the results is a deeply inefficient distribution of where people live. Says who? Go to hell. It's like, I'll live where I want. People live where they want to live. Right. And if you don't think that's efficiently distributed, you can sod off. That's not your concern. Why don't these busybodies, these people from journalism to the WEF to our own federal government, for crying out loud, just mind their own damn business. Stop trying to reorder society in this theory-driven way that people would be happier if they were renting. No, people are easier to control when they're renting.
Yeah.
They say you will own nothing and be happy. You may own nothing, but somebody owns that. Exactly. Somebody owns the house you're living in. Somebody owns the car you're riding in. So this whole idea of just kind of glorifying the idea of giving up all of your autonomy to the state, to something above you, is insidious, and people need to reject it. I hope they're rejecting it. I would have thought these ideas would have been so wacky and outside the mainstream that they would only be whispered in the dark corners of some library at a liberal college in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Instead, now they're out there in the front and in the news and in Axios trying to convince people to be miserable, and instead of pursuing their own happiness, which is
on stage at Davos. That's where these ideas are being spouted. And I'm pretty sure that Felix wrote this article because he's trying to secure a ticket for next year's Davos. That's just my pure speculation there.
Hey, as the only renter among us three, I can also tell you that rental rates are going through the roof, and you're unable to build long-term wealth.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm spending so much of my disposable income just trying to meet my rent, which just in the Chicago suburbs, I can tell you, and I'm sure you both know, that the rent is just out of control right now, and especially in urban areas, New York, Chicago. I've got some friends who are renting downtown right now, and it's crazy. So I think, Donnie, this is another way of just kind of keeping us in that, in that position where we're just constantly treading water. We can't get ahead. We can't actually, build up wealth, buy a home, and pursue the American dream, because we're just barely able to get by, just barely able to, buy our groceries. And, the stats show it. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 2/3 don't have, $250 for a surprise, bill. And I think this is just all part of that. I think that, growing up, it was so much easier for the middle class to get ahead. And nowadays, and I think a lot of it is due to, big government policies that, they're making it almost impossible for people of my generation, Donnie, our generation, to really, get ahead and be, in a position better off than our parents were in. And that's a really sad state of affairs. I think that also leads to less kids and just kind of a general sense of disillusionment, and and it's like, why? Mm-hmm. Because that's just a really sad state of affairs. My mom's dad came from Germany with not a penny in his pocket and was able to own a home because back then if you were willing to work hard and save some money, you could easily afford a home. Nowadays, that just does not exist in your wildest imagination.
Yeah, the macro trends seemingly are pushing us towards a in the future you'll own nothing trajectory. And I might do a whole bunch of these because housing is one. I could do one on particular on media and content. I already mentioned the Netflix thing, but there are some very interesting ramifications about that. Cars, a whole bunch of different stuff, which is all nicely outlined in this beautiful book, Dark Future. Chapter 5 is In the Future You'll Own Nothing. So a lot of great information in that one if you haven't picked up this book yet. But while I was doing that Davos Watch segment, we did get a super chat from, I'm going to butcher this name pronunciation here, Anaki. Give me a thumbs up if that's the way that you pronounce it. $20 super chat saying, thank you for continuing to shed a light.
I'm willing to bet it's Annika.
Annika?
That's what I'm betting.
Okay, well, am I right or is Chris right? We need to keep poking holes in the narrative. Your show is a treasure. Thank you, Anna Key. That's how I think
Annika. It's going to be Annika.
I'm sticking with it. All right, but I want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of In the Tank. And you're right. All right,
Annika, see?
All right, fine.
You're the worst at names anyway.
You guys, I am the worst at names. But join us every week for a new episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe. Write a review for us on iTunes, especially if you're an audio-only listener there. And if you are an audio-only listener, you can catch us on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are streaming this live on Facebook and Rumble and Twitter and YouTube. And you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Like I said, that super chat functionality is enabled if you want to support the show that way. But just hitting that like button, subscribing, sharing this content, or leaving a comment under the video all helps break through those big tech algorithms and prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Also, if you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod, or you can send us your comments and suggestions to the show by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
StopInSocialism.com. We got really great content up there, and Heartland.org. Like I said last week, we're trying to fill the opinion page with all the great op-eds that our writers produce on a weekly basis.
All right. Thank you, Annika, and thank you to everyone else. Join us next week. We'll talk to you next time.